Now, we know how much everybody loves a vaccination since COVID. Starting this month, the NHS is launching a nationwide chickenpox vaccination programme for toddlers across the UK. The rollout will see kids offered 2 doses of the vaccine, typically at 12 and 18 months of age. To ensure wider coverage, a temporary catch-up scheme will also be available for older kids between 2 and 5. Let's speak with Martin Gower, former NHS Trust chairman. Martin, morning to you. So this was never a vaccine before, or it was there but rarely used? What's the story with the chickenpox jab?
Well, it was a separate vaccine that children from 9 months onwards were allowed to have. It appears that it was rather open to parental choice, and I don't think the take-up was that great. I mean, I do think today's story is fairly positive because it's going to be combined with the MMR vaccine, and I think that's a really good thing. It's a positive story. We've rather lagged behind other countries, though, who've been doing this for quite a long time. The USA, Germany, France, this has not been
right. So no one gets chickenpox in those countries, I guess, because they're vaccinated against it.
I don't think nobody gets chickenpox. I think as with
broadly speaking.
Well, I think as with all vaccinations, Ian, we know from COVID that it didn't stop you getting COVID. And I think this is true of this as well. Yeah. I mean, related to chickenpox is shingles, of course, which adults have had. I had it a few years back. It's very, very nasty. I'd had the vaccination for shingles, which I would urge older people to have. Jump at it because it's a horrible thing to have, but it is associated with chickenpox. And of course you can catch it from somebody with chickenpox.
Yeah, I mean, it was always a kind of bit of a jokey thing when you were a kid, wasn't it? Have you had chickenpox yet? No, I haven't had it. In fact, you sort of half envied kids who'd had it. I guess in worse scenarios, it can be perhaps more devastating. I mean, for most kids, they get the spots for a few days and then they eventually go away. You feel a bit rubbish and then you're back to school. But for others, this is a more dangerous thing to get.
Well, it is. It can be, especially if they have some other condition. For example, children with leukemia. Or other ongoing conditions, it can be quite damaging to them. But the interesting one is, I think years ago, they used to have chickenpox parties, so that to get as many kids getting chickenpox as possible to get it over and done with.
But when you've had it, in theory, you can't get it again. Is that although I do hear some people say I've had it twice.
In theory, you can't get it again, but you are, of course, subject to that virus stays in your body.
Yeah.
As does, of course, the vaccination. So it's assumed the vaccination will work. I think it will work. It's well proven. This is nothing new. It's a bit newer to us in this country, but I think it's a positive step.
Another story here that's worth a word, if you wouldn't mind, Martin. Private prostate surgery has more than doubled in recent years. 13,000 men choosing private treatment in 2024. That's a 92% increase in around about the last 10 years. I can understand why this would have happened. There's no screening process, no mandatory standard state given screening process for prostate, even though it's one of the biggest killers of men. And we're hearing more and more about it, some very high-profile cases, of course, which is good in some respects, that it highlights the need to get checked. But in the absence of trying to get, I suppose, treatment and to see a GP, many are clearly turning to the private sector.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is the most interesting story of the day, in a way, because it shows the creep there is generally towards the private sector. And this is happening not only by people privately paying for their care in the private sector, but also the NHS paying for people to have care in the private sector. So this is a major story, and frankly, a drift that is bound to happen. It just is a bit annoying because it means that, of course, people are paying for their care twice.
Yeah. Once
through their tax and then again through their private insurance, or indeed paying for it out of their savings. It's to do with waiting lists, it's to do with inefficiency, and frankly, it's to do with the background of politicians running our healthcare service of whatever colour, and actually it doesn't really work, and nobody else really does this. It just seems to me that the drift is being kind of managed, the slow privatisation, not of the system of payment, but eventually, of course, the system of provision. And that's shifting. I mean, you look at prostate cancer, but something like cataract surgery, for example, it's highly likely that if somebody needs a cataract operation, highly likely that they will end up in the private sector, although being funded by the NHS.
Yeah.
So that drift has been there a while, and I only see it accelerating.
Final one here as well. We can't wait for a public inquiry to fix NHS maternity care, says Wes Streeting. I wasn't aware, Martin, that there was a need for a public inquiry. I know there are sometimes big question marks around maternity and neonatal services needing sort of an overhaul. What's predominantly the problem that is requiring the Secretary of State to endorse an inquiry into it? What's gone wrong?
The problem is that around the country, in very specific places, I know there was one in Sussex. I know there's been a history in Morecambe Bay. That goes back quite a long way. Of course, there was the whole thing that went on with Lucy Letby. These were very, very poor maternity services. And actually, I think the maternity service is pretty disgraceful we provide in this country. It's one that I'd privatise tomorrow, because I just don't think it really works. And it's an odd one, but it's quite disgraceful, really, Ian, that the number of unnecessary deaths of small children, of babies, when you compare it to other countries, we're really, really poor at this. But a public inquiry is not the answer. Public inquiries almost always are to do with governments being seen to do what they ought to be doing. It's politics instead of healthcare. Let's look at the good places where maternity services work, and where they're well respected locally, and let's copy them. It's not rocket science, is it? You look at where the best is and you copy it and you do the same thing.
You wonder that about the NHS in general, don't you? That if you were, and I'm sure there's a reason for this, you might be able to shine a bit of light, Martin. Just a final point here. You always think, if I became Secretary of State for Health, I'd look around the world, I'd find the very best that excels in all sorts of areas, whether it's maternity, cancer, heart conditions, etc. And I'd go, right, whatever they're doing, copy that. Now, I'm sure that's a very schoolboy way of looking at it, because I'm pretty sure Wes Streeting probably thought that a few years ago. So what happens when you get the big job? Why is it you can't just, quote, copy that?
Because the politicians think that they must be seen to be running the healthcare system in the country. If you go to France or Germany, two of our nearest neighbours, that simply doesn't happen. The idea, for example, of a government minister negotiating with trade unions over salaries for junior doctors just wouldn't happen anywhere else. The second part, Ian, if you were appointed Secretary of State for Health, is to step back from it and allow healthcare system to develop in a way where locally they can thrive, and that will be in partnership with the private and the not-for-profit sectors as well. It must be.
I read a great thing not long ago about how the French view their healthcare system, whereas we look at it almost like a sort of charitable, almost like a religion. The French look at it like a service, the same way they look at the transport system. It needs to work, it should work, we pay for it, so make it work.
But Ian, also, people don't take enough responsibility. Take the first point, we talked about PSA tests and for prostate. I have a PSA test every 3 or 4 years. Nobody called me to have it. I just simply asked for it. And I have the same time I have a blood test for cholesterol and all the other things, diabetes, whatever. And my surgery are fine. They do it. I get the response back. I get it put on my app. And honestly, we all need, as a country, to say this is not somebody else's problem, it's our problem.
Spot on. Martin, great to have you with us. Thank you. Martin Gower, former NHS Trust Chairman. He's absolutely bang on that last point. I've told this story before. About a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I had a set of blood tests privately, went to a private clinic and had some blood tests. And it cost I think it was about 250 quid, 270 quid. It's a big, it's the full complement of blood tests, if you like. And I had it done about 10 o'clock in the morning. The results, I think, came through either at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, seriously, or the next morning or something like that. But the point was this. the week before, I'd spent about 500 quid having my car serviced. And nobody blinks at that, because I had to have it done. The service was about 350, and then there were a few nuts and bolts that were missing, and so they did all of that. And you don't think, you spend more on your car than your own health. And I went to a walk-in centre, a trusted one, got a set of blood tests, everything was tickety-boo. You could look at your cholesterol, it's a little bit, maybe you could do something about that, and whatever it was, you know. But we don't do that. And as Martin said, personal responsibility is something that still eludes us when it comes to healthcare. 034